Eighth, for divorcing my depressed wife because her depression and depression-induced spending are dragging me down. When I first met my wife, I felt like I had stumbled upon a force of nature, a woman whose sheer determination and vibrant optimism made the world feel boundless. At 26, I was deep into my MBA program, carving out a future that I envisioned as prosperous, filled with success and financial stability. She was 27, in the final stages of her rigorous certification process to become a nurse anesthesiologist, a path that demanded precision, resilience, and an unwavering work ethic. We were both on parallel trajectories, driven by ambition and the belief that the world held infinite possibilities if we just worked hard enough to seize them. I still remember the first time we talked about the future, about the life we were going to build together. It was a late summer evening, the air thick with the lingering warmth of the day, cicadas buzzing in the background. We sat on the hood of my car, parked on a hill overlooking the city, and she painted pictures of adventure, of spontaneous trips across the world, of medical missions in underprivileged countries, of a life that was as thrilling as it was fulfilling. I shared my own dreams of financial independence, of climbing the corporate ladder, of being the kind of husband and father who could provide his family with anything they ever needed. There was no doubt in my mind that we were a perfect match, two people who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. At that time, the idea of children was a distant but beautiful possibility, something we both agreed should come later, when we had secured our careers and built the foundation for the life we envisioned. There was no rush. We had time. And time, back then, felt like an infinite resource. Our early years together were exhilarating. We navigated the demanding schedules of our respective careers with a shared understanding of sacrifice. There were weeks when we barely saw each other, passing like ships in the night, but when we did, it was electric. We celebrated each other's milestones with fervor, toasting late at night to job offers and promotions, to passing exams and securing contracts. She was my biggest cheerleader, and I was hers. When I landed my consulting job with a 6-figure salary and a generous signing bonus, it felt like we had truly made it. She, too, was excelling in her field, working in one of the top hospitals in the state, earning an impressive salary that only grew with overtime. Together, we were unstoppable. Our combined income allowed us to indulge in luxuries we had only dreamed about in our university days. Weekend getaways to tropical destinations, fine dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, front row seats at concerts. Every experience was another notch in our shared story of success. Eventually, we bought our first home, a sprawling house with high ceilings and large windows that let in golden streams of sunlight every morning. It was more than a house. It was a testament to our hard work, to the years of sacrifice and dedication that had led us here. We decorated it together, her taste effortlessly weaving elegance and comfort into every room. It was perfect. Looking back, it is almost painful to remember just how happy we were. There was no sign, no foreshadowing of the storm that would later come. If someone had told me then that in a few years I would be questioning my marriage, questioning whether I was being manipulated, questioning my own sense of morality for even considering leaving the woman I once adored, I would have laughed in their face. But life has a way of unraveling even the most carefully constructed plans, of eroding even the strongest foundations. And sometimes, the person you thought you knew better than anyone else becomes a stranger right before your eyes. The years leading up to my wife's breakdown felt like a dream, the kind of life I had envisioned back when I was still a student, grinding through case studies and late-night networking events, hoping to secure the kind of future where financial stability was a given rather than a constant concern. My consulting job was everything I had worked for, an opportunity that not only paid well but positioned me in a career trajectory that promised continual growth. The long hours and travel demands were exhausting, but the payoff was undeniable. Each new project came with a higher salary, a bigger bonus, a growing reputation in my industry. I thrived under the pressure, relishing the challenge, knowing that every sacrifice was building the life I had dreamed of. My wife was just as successful. She had worked relentlessly to become a nurse anesthesiologist, a field that required not only intelligence and precision but the ability to remain composed under immense pressure. She was a natural. Her colleagues admired her skill, her patients trusted her, and the hospital saw her as an invaluable asset. She was making an impressive salary even before overtime, and with the extra shifts she often picked up, our combined income put us in a financial position most people only fantasized about. With money no longer a concern, we indulged in experiences that reinforced the feeling that we were living life to the fullest. We traveled whenever our schedules allowed, weekends in Napa, week-long getaways to the Caribbean, spontaneous trips to Europe just because we could. We went skydiving in New Zealand, swam with sharks in the Maldives, and celebrated birthdays in luxury resorts overlooking turquoise waters. We were young, successful, and untethered by anything other than our ambition and love for adventure. Eventually, we settled down, buying a house that felt like a physical manifestation of our achievements. It was beautiful open concept, modern yet warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. It was a place meant for the future we had discussed so many times before, a home where we would eventually raise a family. Everything about our life felt solid, predictable in the best way. Until, seemingly out of nowhere, it wasn't. 3 years ago, the cracks began to show. It happened suddenly, at least, that's how it felt to me. My wife had been pulling long hours at the hospital, sometimes working back-to-back shifts that left her physically and emotionally drained. I noticed she had been quieter than usual, but I chalked it up to exhaustion, thinking she just needed a break, a vacation, something to recharge her. I had no idea how deep the exhaustion ran, how much she had been holding in. One afternoon, in the middle of a routine day, I came home to find her curled up on the living room floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking as if she had no control over it. It was a kind of anguish I had never seen before, raw and unrelenting, and no matter how much I tried to console her, she couldn't stop. She gasped for breath between sobs, her words fragmented and disjointed, spilling out in a desperate confession that she couldn't do it anymore. The stress, the pressure, the endless demand for perfection, it had broken her. I called an ambulance. She fought me on it at first, insisting that she just needed to rest, that she would be fine, but I wasn't taking any chances. She was hospitalized for weeks, undergoing evaluations, therapy, and medication adjustments. It was a blur of consultations and second opinions, of carefully worded diagnoses that all pointed to the same conclusion: severe depression, likely exacerbated by burnout. I felt helpless, watching the woman I loved struggle to find her way back to herself, watching as the confidence and energy that had once defined her seemed to drain away, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. When she was finally discharged, I made it clear that she didn't need to rush back to work. We agreed she would take 6 months off to focus on her recovery, and in the meantime, I would handle everything financially, emotionally, domestically. I didn't hesitate. I had vowed to be there in sickness and in health, and this was exactly what that promise meant. At first, it seemed like a good plan. She needed time to heal, and I wanted to give her that. But almost immediately, her idea of recovery took on a form I hadn't anticipated. Within weeks, she began spending money at an alarming rate: $2,000 to $3,000 every other week on shopping sprees, extravagant trips with friends, spontaneous weekend getaways. She would disappear for days at a time, sometimes without telling me where she was going, only returning home with bags of designer clothes, new accessories, and receipts that made my stomach churn. I told myself it was temporary. That maybe she was trying to find joy again, trying to remind herself what it felt like to be alive. I rationalized that if this was what she needed to feel better, I could handle it. The money wasn't the issue, we could afford it, but the way she was shutting me out, the way she avoided real conversations about how she was doing, about whether she was improving, made me uneasy. She stopped helping around the house entirely. Laundry piled up, dishes sat in the sink for days, and I found myself juggling a full-time, high-stress job while also managing the responsibilities she had once shared with me. It wasn't just the physical labor, it was the absence of effort, the lack of any acknowledgement that I was carrying everything on my shoulders. I wanted to be patient, to be understanding, but every time I tried to talk about it, she shut down, accusing me of not supporting her, of trying to control her. The 6-month mark came and went. I cautiously broached the idea of her returning to work, suggesting part-time hours at first, just to ease back in. The moment I brought it up, she shut down completely. She barely spoke to me for days, retreating into herself in a way that made me feel like I had somehow betrayed her just by suggesting she try to regain some normalcy. I backed off, telling myself that maybe she just needed more time. Then, a year passed. A full year of me working tirelessly to keep everything together while she continued spending recklessly, barely engaging with me unless it was to ask for money or plan another trip. When I revisited the conversation, it ended the same way: another breakdown, more accusations that I didn't understand what she was going through, more silence and avoidance. At some point, I stopped knowing what to do. I had been patient. I had been understanding. I had upheld every promise I made when I married her. But she wasn't getting better. If anything, she was drifting further and further away from the woman I once knew, and I was the one left scrambling to keep everything from falling apart. Still, I held on. Because I had told myself that leaving wasn't an option. That if she was sick, if this was truly something she couldn't control, then I couldn't abandon her. But deep down, an unsettling thought had begun creeping into my mind. What if she wasn't trying to get better? What if I was the only one still fighting for our marriage? A year had passed since the initial 6-month recovery period had come and gone. A year of me shouldering the weight of our lives, maintaining the household, paying off the endless stream of credit card bills, and absorbing the emotional toll of a wife who seemed perpetually distant, forever on the verge of another breakdown. I had watched as she continued to spend recklessly, traveling on a whim, surrounding herself with friends who enabled the fantasy that life was just one endless vacation, while I remained behind, tethered to the reality she seemed determined to ignore. I had been patient. More patient than I ever thought I was capable of being. And yet, when I gently asked if she felt ready to return to work, even in a limited capacity, the reaction was immediate and familiar. She shut down completely, withdrawing into silence, treating my words as if they were an attack rather than a suggestion. Her expression hardened, her shoulders tensed, and without a single word of acknowledgement, she retreated into the bedroom and locked the door. She stayed there for hours. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red and swollen, but she wouldn't look at me. I told myself I had pushed too soon. That she just needed more time. Another few months. Another year, maybe. But another year came and went. I was exhausted. Not just physically from balancing a demanding career and managing an entire household alone, but emotionally drained from the constant feeling that I was living with a stranger who refused to let me in. I could feel myself unraveling in ways I hadn't before. The certainty I once had about our marriage, about my role as her husband and protector, was starting to erode under the weight of endless excuses and broken promises. I tried a different approach. If working was too much for her, maybe shifting her focus to family could bring some meaning back into her life. We were in an incredible financial position, more than enough to support a child without her needing to work. We had talked about kids before, back when we were younger, when our careers were the primary focus. She had always been on board with the idea, always spoken about motherhood as a distant but inevitable part of our journey together. So, I suggested we start trying. To my surprise, she agreed. It was the first time in years she had genuinely seemed willing to make a commitment to something beyond herself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was the missing piece, the thing that would help her reconnect to life, to us. We went through the motions: the ovulation tracking, the doctor's visits, the discussions about baby names and nursery colors. When months passed with no success, we both underwent fertility testing, only to be met with the same response: you are both healthy. Keep trying. So, we did. I wanted to believe she was as invested in this as I was. I wanted to believe that we were working toward the same goal, that we were building something together again. But the doubt never fully left me. She remained distant, even as we attempted to conceive. She never truly seemed excited or engaged in the process. The woman who had once thrown herself wholeheartedly into everything she did now treated our attempts to start a family like an obligation she had reluctantly agreed to rather than something she genuinely wanted. There were excuses: she was tired, she wasn't feeling well, the timing wasn't right. And even when she did try, there was no warmth in it, no enthusiasm. Just mechanical effort, followed by cold detachment. The intimacy we once had, the passion, the fire, the connection was long gone. I tried not to let it eat away at me, but the doubts grew louder with each passing month. Then, last week, I found the pills. It was an accident, a moment of pure chance. I had been driving her car to work when my phone slipped from my pocket, disappearing under the driver's seat. I pulled over to retrieve it, reaching blindly beneath the seat, my fingers grazing against something small and plastic. When I pulled it out, my breath caught in my throat. A pack of birth control pills. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there for a long time, staring at the packet, my mind racing. My heart pounded against my ribs, my grip tightening around the tiny container that, in an instant, had unraveled every shred of trust I had left. How long had she been taking them? Had she ever actually wanted a baby? Had the last year been nothing more than a carefully constructed lie, designed to keep me placated while she continued living exactly as she pleased? I turned the car around and drove straight home. The office, my responsibilities, none of it mattered in that moment. I needed answers. I walked through the front door, the birth control still clutched in my hand. She was in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, sipping coffee as if nothing in the world was wrong. I stood there, staring at her, feeling something inside me crack. When I confronted her, I expected guilt. I expected tears, apologies, some attempt at an explanation. Instead, she broke down in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not with remorse, but with rage. She called me an abuser. The accusation hit harder than I could have ever imagined. Her voice was sharp, venomous, her eyes blazing with fury as she screamed at me, accusing me of forcing her into something she never wanted, of pressuring her into a life she hadn't chosen. She spat the words at me like a curse, telling me that I was the reason she had broken down in the first place, that my expectations, my insistence on normalcy, had pushed her past the brink. I was too stunned to respond at first. The woman who had once shared my dreams, who had once spoken about children and family with excitement, was now looking at me like I was the villain in her story. I tried to stay calm. I reminded her that she had agreed to this, that she had said she wanted this, that she had chosen this path with me. But she refused to hear it. She started listing every sacrifice she had made, every expectation I had placed upon her, twisting the narrative until I was the one to blame for everything: her breakdown, her inability to work, her unhappiness. And all the while, I could only think about the pills. The pills she had hidden. The pills that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she had been lying to me for an entire year. The weight of it was suffocating. I brought up the spending, the trips, the fact that I had carried the household, the marriage, everything, while she had done nothing but take. I reminded her that I had never pressured her to work, that I had given her every out, every option, that all I had asked for was honesty. She shut down completely. Refused to talk to me. Told me she couldn't bear to share a space with me anymore because it was detrimental to her mental health to be around her abuser. So, I left. I packed a bag and went to our vacation house, letting the weight of everything crash down on me in the silence of an empty space. And now, here I am. Staring at the shattered remains of my marriage, trying to make sense of how we got here. trying to understand how I became the villain in a story I thought we were writing together. The days at the vacation house blurred into one another, each one passing with an agonizing weight pressing down on my chest. I spent my time pacing the empty rooms, staring out at the ocean, replaying every conversation, every moment, every choice that had led to this. It felt surreal, like waking up in someone else's life, one where I was the villain in a story I never meant to write. I checked my phone obsessively, half expecting, half hoping for a message from her, some form of acknowledgement, some attempt to bridge the chasm between us. But there was nothing. No calls. No texts. No apologies. Only silence. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be partners, a team. We had built a life together, one filled with promises and dreams. I had always believed in those dreams, believed in her, the woman I fell in love with, the woman I fought for. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been fighting alone for years. I scrolled through my bank app and stared at the numbers that didn't lie. The latest credit card bill had hit another $10,000, spent on God knows what. A string of charges from high-end boutiques, spa resorts, and first-class tickets to places I hadn't even realized she had gone. My stomach churned. I closed the app and threw the phone onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. How had I let this happen? How had I let myself become this, a man who paid for a life he wasn't even living? A man whose wife had rewritten their history so thoroughly that he was now the villain? I wasn't naive. I knew what depression could do to a person. I had seen it strip away joy, purpose, the very will to live. I had seen it reduce the strongest people to hollow shells of themselves. But this felt like something else. This felt like manipulation. This felt like betrayal. And yet, I still hesitated. I told myself that maybe she wasn't fully aware of what she was doing. That maybe, buried beneath the accusations and the avoidance, she was still the woman I had fallen in love with. Maybe she was lost, spiraling, unable to see the wreckage she was leaving behind. But wasn't that just another excuse? Wasn't that just another way of avoiding the truth staring me in the face? I could feel my resolve shifting, my mind settling into a space I had resisted for far too long. I needed to leave. For real this time. No more waiting for her to come around. No more hoping that she would wake up one day and magically become the woman she used to be. That woman was gone. Maybe she had been gone for years, and I had just refused to see it. I packed a bag that night, not the way I had when I first left back then. It had been a temporary retreat, an escape to clear my head. But this time, I packed with finality. The next morning, I drove back to the house. She was home, curled up on the couch in a silk robe, scrolling through her phone, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't accused me of abuse. Like she hadn't spent the past 3 years living off me, lying to me, shutting me out. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the scene, the absurd normalcy of it. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice flat. I thought you were staying at the vacation house. I came to get my things. She finally looked up, her expression unreadable. What do you mean? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to hold her gaze. I mean I'm leaving. For good. Silence. For the first time in a long time, I saw something flicker across her face, something that almost looked like fear. But she buried it quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. So that's it, she said, setting her coffee cup down with a soft clink. You're just going to walk away. My throat tightened. I have to. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Wow. I knew you were selfish, but I didn't think you'd actually abandon me. Something inside me snapped. Abandon you? I repeated, my voice shaking. Are you serious? I have been here for 3 years. I have carried everything, the bills, the house, you while you traveled, spent my money, and refused to even talk to me. I have supported you in every possible way, even when you shut me out, even when you called me your abuser. And now, because I finally have the courage to walk away, I'm the selfish one. She stared at me, her expression shifting. For a moment, I thought I saw something like regret. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. Fine, she said, crossing her arms. Go. Run away like you always do. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I'm not running. I'm choosing myself for once. She didn't respond. I didn't wait for her to. I turned, walked upstairs, and grabbed the last of my things. I didn't linger. I didn't give myself time to second guess. I walked out the front door, loaded my car, and drove away without looking back. The weight of it didn't hit me until I was miles away, pulling into the driveway of a hotel where I had booked a temporary stay. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had done it. I had left. And yet, beneath the relief, there was grief. Not for her, not for the woman she had become, but for the life I had imagined. For the marriage I had fought so hard to save. For the man I had once been, the man who had believed that love, patience, and loyalty could fix anything. I wasn't that man anymore. And maybe that was okay.